former minister, and founder of Something or Other Publishing. Wade Franson is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture.
Okay.
Tonight's episode, The Temple Solution, with Bert Lorenz.
Good evening, everyone. This is Wade Franson. I'm the host of the Created in the Image of God, the Role of Religion in Society. Tonight, we have a very special program prepared for you with an author of a unique book, a book that seeks to present an alternate view on something that is so important that the entire Bible is written about events surrounding it. And the world has its focus on that region of the earth. And multiple religions are fighting over issues related to this topic. I am speaking of the temple as established by Solomon, the location of the temple site in Israel. And tonight we have a very special author, Bert Lorenz, who has written a book called The Temple Solution. And he asked the question, could a new location for Solomon's temple offer a narrow path for peace in the Middle East? Now, we've been having a little bit of technical difficulties trying to get everything working for Bert. He's in Indio, California, and there's been a bit of a dust storm going on affecting the internet connection, but we're going to bring him into the studio and see if we've gotten those technical issues resolved. Bert, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
And we've got your audio back with us as well. Very good. Very good. So there is a little bit of a lag. We'll try to be aware of that as we talk. But Bert, the first opening segment of this show is typically allowing us to hear the creation story behind the guest, where you come from, your parents, the conditions into which you were brought forth on this planet, and those very early childhood experiences that shaped you in terms of making you who you are, even before you were consciously aware of all of those things. So going back to your very earliest experiences, just so that we can get to know a little bit better where you came from. So share with us some of those details about your parents and the world that you were brought into.
Yes.
We're waiting patiently, but we're getting very little sound. I hear that the sound is on, but we're basically not hearing anything you're saying. Just
the U.S. and
I will try try removing Bert here briefly from the studio and see if that fixes it again. And thank you for the audience for participating there in the chat. Just a quick question. I'm just hearing only every few seconds a little bit of sound coming from Bert. Just wanting to make sure that everyone can hear me okay, to make sure that this is on my end perhaps and not on his end.
Intro about your sister, and I mentioned that because California care of my sister.
I think what we're having is some kind of upload issues. Bert, when I brought you back in
Okay,
from outside the
that's
studio,
probably
I heard.
go.
Go ahead. I'm
Yeah,
hearing you now a little bit.
my sister
Go ahead.
is ill, so it's good to be taking care of her when she needs help.
Yeah, I don't think we caught most of that. We
So
understood that you're.
my audio is it's interrupt well, so it makes it a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
But I'll fast forward a little bit and say that I had a couple really good jobs growing up where I was given a lot of opportunity to just go out and solve a problem. Where we have like $1 million problem, and I was
Well, Bert, we had you going there for a while. We had your audio working for a while, but it's frozen again now.
really exposed me to new difference in just going beyond my own limitations and understanding.
I think we're going to have to find a time where Bert can join us from perhaps a different location, or when the dust storm is not impacting the internet service in his area out there in Indio, California. I do, since everyone's here to hear about this topic, I have just begun to dive into Bert's book. There's a lot of technical detail. I will share that one of the things that Bert and I talked about in preparation for this show were some of the geographical and physical features of the city of David, its location to the outer wall of Jerusalem, the supposed Temple Mount site, the location of the Jewish quarter. And Bert has I'm sorry, I'm getting a phone call from Bert now, from which of course I can't really take and continue with my phone and computer and whatnot. So I'll have to connect with him better. But I was actually in Jerusalem many years ago, the city of David, and I was on an archaeological expedition in 1981. Very prestigious project in conjunction with Hebrew University. And one of the things that we noticed was the city of David is not very large. It's a small site. We sometimes read these epic stories in the Bible, but if you've ever traveled to the Holy Land and journeyed around, you understand that the situation is very different than one might get the impression of. Everything is geographically very close, and the physical circumstances are pulled from antiquity, from the book of Josephus and other historical records. And everyone has a theory, everyone has an idea, and they sometimes interpret the facts according to their own theories. And Bert has taken a fresh look at it. I'm getting a couple of people who are suggesting we try this by phone, and I really appreciate that. I think we may try to do that. Let me see if I can bring Bert back into the studio real quick and see if there's been any improvement. Otherwise, we may try the phone route. Bert, are you there still, or should I just like boot you out and try by phone? All right, everyone, give me a moment. I'll remove Bert and just quickly try him by phone. When you try to do a live show, these things can happen. So I ask everyone to bear with us. We might get this resolved here in a minute.
Is ill, and I'm helping take care of her over here in Indio, California, which is close to Coachella. We have a windstorm raging outside, so I think that might be causing some of the interference because it picks up a lot of dust. But I thought that was very impressive, and we're helping and we're loving on my sister. We're just doing all we can. So I'm feeling for you as well with your loss.
Thank you, Bert. To the audience, I was asking earlier to let me know if you could hear Bert, but I was on mute when I was talking. Of course, Bert could hear me because my phone was not on mute. But hopefully now we've got all the audio issues resolved. And perhaps somebody can let us know if Bert's audible through the microphone setup that we have right now. So Bert, tell us a little bit about your origin story, your parents, where you came from, those early experiences that shaped you. We'll just spend a couple of minutes on this because we've already lost a little bit of time, then we'll jump into the material.
Okay, sounds great. Right, so my father was born in the U.S. and my mother in Germany. They met in the States in the Bay Area, and I have two sisters, and we grew up in a regular California home in San Jose, and it was a great youth. We went to church and pretty much tried to learn a lot. I thought it was very interesting, and I wanted to just learn as much as I could. And then it was a Lutheran church, by the way, and I came across just situations where I questioned it, and I tried to understand, why do things not quite make sense to me? And I realized I became a truth seeker, and a researcher, and I decided to just spend time and look into the issues myself and to really understand the problems that exist. And I didn't really know that there were so many different opinions, especially it goes for everything, religion, politics. I mean, I don't even need to talk about it. Everybody probably knows what's happening, out in the world today. It's crazy. So, but I wanted to say that I was very fortunate as a youth to go traveling to Europe and just be exposed to different cultures and different countries, languages. And I really learned a lot from that experience. And that opened my mind to be able to just consider other people and how things work in other places than the United States. And my last point is going to be that I was exposed to a few really good jobs. one was at Apple Computer, where I was given a lot of opportunities to solve problems where no one knew how to fix a problem, and they would just say, "Hey, here's a task. Go out there and go do that, and go figure it out," because we don't know what to do. And
what was your role? What was your specific role there at Apple, Bert?
I was a project manager and a supervisor.
Okay.
Yeah.
And were you working on sort of technical engineering problems, or what were the kinds of?
More logistics.
Okay.
Mostly logistics problems. Yeah. Yeah.
So was that because your international experience? So was that like under Tim Cook, rather, and the operations side?
Well, so when I got hired on, it was with Steve Jobs. So it was way back in the beginning. It was great. The best job I ever had, I should just say. It was great.
Amazing.
It was quite an experience. So, but I tell you what, Steve Jobs, he had that one saying, like, "No bozos," and he really empowered people. I got a shirt, like the power to be your best. And that was one of the mottos that we kind of lived by over there. And
nice.
It was great, where I really was able to think outside the box. And that's the main point I wanted to make, because my book is basically about thinking outside of the trapezoid, right? The Temple Mount trapezoid area. And so that's probably enough to be said about that. But I really gained a lot of just that researcher's heart to find the truth, especially, and then, and be creative, I should say, as well, from those experiences. Excellent.
So I'm going to go ahead and real quick, not to jinx anything and risk the technology here, but I'm going to show the video trailer from your book real quick. Unless you feel that we can just skip that and jump right into some of the facts. What I do want to mention, though, is that we will be making sure that the member in the audience who participates with comments that are helpful, interesting, inquisitive, we'll pick one of those and make sure that audience member gets a copy of your book. But would you want us to show that video that we had prepared, or do you want to just jump right into the topic?
No, let's just go forward, because people can go to my YouTube channel and actually access that themselves.
Okay.
So let's just kind of go forward. Yeah, that sounds great.
Well, perfect. So the basic, so tell us, first of all, what do we mean when we say the temple, right? Because there's a first temple, there's a second temple, and then there are people who anticipate a new temple, right? So what do we mean when we talk about the temple?
Right, that's a great question. So first temple was the Temple of Solomon, and the second, it was built through the Hasmonean dynasty. So at this point, people are wondering about the third temple, okay? And I'll just, lay it out there already, where at first I thought there would actually be a temple. But after doing some research, I've kind of come to the conclusion that all there probably is going to be is a tabernacle, David's tabernacle, which is like a tent. So that's where my research has led. And the location is actually problematic. So people probably, I'm not sure, many people follow the news. They know there's a war in Israel. And I don't know if people really know about the red heifers, but I don't know the gentleman's name, but he produced a video saying that the war was started in Israel on October 7th due to the red heifers and the possibilities that the Jewish people or rabbis would try to build another temple, and that would, I guess, evidently offend them. And their Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the current, I'll call it the so-called Temple Mount area, and that's where that's where.
Well, and to be clear, because people have perhaps an image of Jerusalem, and in fact, I was showing a few minutes ago the cover of your book, and I'll just go back and show that real quick. And there, I just realized, could people even hear me, because I was not in the studio myself when I showed the book cover. And Bert, of course, you could hear me, but they couldn't. So I was just saying that when I was on the City of David archaeological expedition, I read Missioner's book, The Source, which took a tell, which is an archaeological site. And he went down layer by layer by layer by layer, in archaeological terms, digging down from the top, which is the most recent layer, down to the bottom, which is the most ancient layer. And he explained the historical events that were happening in this tell, this mound. And so the thing about the Holy Land is you have layers and layers and layers and layers of history. And these layers are often built on the destruction of one city, and you have an ash layer, and then they'll build another city or something on top of it. And you get it's like the layers of an onion. You can keep peeling them back. And over the course of the centuries and millennia, you have all these different people who, for different reasons, occupied the land, who did so under different belief systems, under different religions. And you've got all these competing and conflicting claims,
right,
about
exactly.
About ownership or spiritual importance, and you end up with what, just contending peoples who have no ability to even understand each other or discuss anything rationally because of all these different aspects and facets. And what I want to do, after having explained that, is talk about something that you put in the notes, and you alluded to it earlier, but that is that everyone interprets the historical facts. Everyone will pick and choose from Josephus, for example, those things that support their theory. And so,
Right.
So how did you approach all this? What did you do to try to, resolve this problem, dig and get to the foundation of things?
Yeah, I mean, that's the great question. So basically, I started doing research during COVID. So, in an amazing way, I had more time on my hands. So it's like, well, and Cephas, by the way, is a great source. And what's interesting about it, by the way, I'll mention that many scholars and archaeologists, they like Josephus for some of the information he provides. But he says, oh, no, he exaggerated, about this and that. And the temple, too, by the way, of course. It's like, oh, those are exaggerations.
Because they know so much better than he does, right, when he was there.
Exactly.
Exactly. So that was so very interesting to me. It's like, really? Okay, so Josephus said this. So guess what? I just followed the trail. It's like, well, Josephus said this. Okay, well, and then I needed to do research. It's like, okay, it's from across, from the internet mostly, just so you know. But I was able to just like track down a few, like nuggets, and the thing about it is like one nugget like leads to like another one. Like, look at that nugget. And I want to mention like the first nugget that, it's not the first one I was aware of, but like, just so you know, I sent you that list of about 40 different items that, support my case. Okay. And it's all in the book, of course. But I think number one is there is a synagogue, and there's a Torah niche in it, right? And that's where the Jewish people would place a Torah scroll facing the temple. And just so you know, so today's Passover, and it's the Jewish holiday, and I can imagine that at the Western Wall there were mobs of people facing that massive wall, and right just beyond that is that golden dome. And they liked that
right,
spot.
The Dome of the Rock.
Dome of the Rock, but they were in that spot praying because that's the closest spot that they believe that there is to their destroyed temple. So it's like, okay, well, they pray to that location, but around the world, Jewish people pray towards Jerusalem. So in this one synagogue, and just so you know, this synagogue, it was discovered in 1948 after a bombing in Jerusalem. They did the archaeology on it and found that this synagogue was in existence when the temple stood, right?
Yep.
So the question is, well, which way was this Torah niche pointing at that point when there was a temple? You could like look out the window and see, oh, there's a temple right there. And guess what? It wasn't facing the Temple Mount area or the Golden Dome or, that area. And I have a map that kind of shows the trajectory of the line that can be drawn.
Is that one of the ones that you sent me the images of?
It is.
Do you know the figure number?
Yeah, it's number 13. So yeah, number 13.
I got lucky. The one that I picked.
Yeah. Oh, good. But that's that map shows just kind of like the overview of the region, the area, on the different valleys and the hills, and a lot of my ideas and how I show that the niche was actually on the new Mount Zion, which is really they also consider that King David's tomb. But,
right. So when you say on this image, King David's estate, the round circle, I'm looking and I'm trying to establish, is that the city of David there?
Right, that would be his palace area.
Yeah. So and allow me now to add a little bit here. So when I was there in 1981. Many years ago, I must have been about 2 months old. Actually, I was in college, and we were digging right there. I mean, literally outside that wall, and we could look up at the temple, at this, AKA the Temple Mount, right?
Right.
And I mentioned already, it's everything's a lot smaller geographically than one thinks when one lives in America and then travels to Israel. But there was a dump. We were literally digging in right by a modern trash dump. And as we were digging down, we were aware that we were digging through a garbage dump, right?
Right.
And this is one of the points that you mention in your support for why that couldn't be. So let's just pick out that one data point, the one nugget. And what is exactly the reason why that garbage dump matters?
Well, the garbage dump, it's the history, and it's the layers and layers of civilization that you talked about. But I think you also mentioned to me that you were in a place where it was like just deep in that location, but in the Kidron Valley, by the way, it was also like 75 feet deep of dump material. And that just tells you, okay, this has been used for quite a while. And actually, the dump in the Kidron Valley, there's the history of it goes back to, you know, the earliest temple.
Right, but you're mentioning that there's indicators that mean the Temple Mount couldn't be where it was because of the proximity to that dump.
You know, that, okay, so that didn't quite make it into the book, but that's another. So just so you know, just because I finished writing the book, it's like, well, I might as well just keep on doing research as it comes up. And one of the interesting points was that there was a forbidden zone shown in Joshua 3 and 4 that suggests that people couldn't be within 2,000 cubits of the ark, or let's say the temple, and the dump, or also the place where they actually broke, where King Uzziah broke idols when he cleaned out the temple area. All that needed to be beyond, you know, that distance, which was called the forbidden zone, by the way. Okay, so it was forbidden for anything that was like just, you know, just, I don't know, negative or something that God would not like. So the question that I brought up to you is,
right, there was you had to draw a distance between the sacred and the holy, or the holy and the profane, the sacred and the profane.
Yeah, and so why would God want to live by the dump? I know I brought that question up to you, because with the current Temple Mount area and that Golden Dome, that dump is just kind of like right down the street, you know, and it's like amazing. It's like, well, then I'm not convinced. That was another good reason that didn't actually make it in the book. But kind of the continuing research says, well, you know what, if you think about it, it makes sense.
Yeah, so is there another figure here that you'd like me to show in terms of discussing some aspects of it?
Sure. So, you know, what I'm thinking about Moses, actually, the last figure, it'd be
15?
I guess 15, 15. So I wanted to make a point, only because in the book, just so you know, audience, I bring up the crucifixion site being on the Mount of Olives, and also suggest that the ark was buried somewhere on the Mount of Olives, by the way. I mean, it's in the book. So, and there are shows, I guess, you know, all over on the internet and on TV that talk about where the ark is, the missing ark. Because guess what? In the end times, that needs to be found. It needs to be located. But what's interesting about figure 15 is that's the top of Mount Nebo looking, so that would be to the west. And off in the distance is the Mount of Olives. So Moses could see the Mount of Olives. I mean, he couldn't see on the other side of it.
And your point is that Mount Nebo, as it's called today, is a likely location of Mount Sinai. Is that right?
No.
So when you mention Moses on Mount Nebo, you're referring to at the end of his life, he was on Mount Nebo and overlooking the Holy Land. Is that what you're referring to?
That's exactly right.
Okay. All right.
So he was able to glimpse the Holy Land before he died.
Yep.
And the reason why I bring that up is because I reference the second book of Maccabees, where it says that Jeremiah buried the ark and the altar of incense and the temple, or the tabernacle of David, in the direction to the east, and in the place that Moses could see. And that's why people, you know, have suggested that Jeremiah moved the ark all the way to Mount Nebo. And, well, it's like, well, okay, that doesn't quite make sense either. So, I mean, that was something, I mean, they were under siege, I mean, in Jerusalem. What makes a lot more sense is that it's actually just close by. It's right there in a cave, okay? It got buried. But I suggest it's going to be found on the Mount of Olives. But
well, speaking of,
kind of piece that together.
Yeah, speaking of being found,
Yeah.
There's constantly new discoveries, right? And
Yeah.
relatively recently there was a very major new discovery. So again, a little bit of a story here. Way back in 1981, as I mentioned, City of David archaeological expedition, very profound, life-changing experience for me. I'm going to go back to well, actually, I'm going to find one of your images that maybe shows a little bit more clearly. Here we go, City of David. So we're looking at figure 2, or the threshing floor, the earthwork, City of David, Mount Moriah. So
Yeah.
so we're there on City of David, and you see how this is all kind of on a hill. And when we were digging, we were outside the wall. It had been, kind of, there was this big dispute actually that it was supposedly an ancient grave, or an ancient cemetery that we were digging in, and the Orthodox Jews were there, and there was actually a little bit of violence involved while we were there. I've got pictures of it, even way back then. But about a year and a half ago now, I took my family to Israel, and we visited the City of David area for the first time since I was there in 81 that I'd been back. And there is now a somewhat modern archaeological museum built up around the dig that I was involved in. And it was quite an amazing experience, especially considering that they have a 2-lane highway now built around that whole part of the city. And they've maintained some of that archaeological work underneath the freeway, actually. And the way in which the modern city has continued to grow up around that archaeology is amazing. But part of the reason that we were doing that dig was to make sure that this was thoroughly excavated and researched before that freeway went in, right? So in the modern nation of Israel, they're taking great pains to research and document every inch of soil in some of these areas to try to reestablish the truth of history. And the reason I bring this up in this context is we were able to do something that was unheard of back when I was there, which was visit the Pool of Siloam. The Pool of Siloam was in dispute. There were many who said, the Bible can't be trusted because they had never found evidence of this Pool of Siloam, and which threw the whole gospel account of John into question. And I remember my 15-year-old daughter that we had to pull out of school to go to Israel. I forget if it was her history teacher said, you know what, I'll give you credit if you just bring pictures of me, of yourself actually being at an archaeology site. I want to know that you're not actually going to Disneyland, that you're really going to Israel and visiting an archaeology site. It seemed a little bit suspect, or sus, as my kids would say. So we have pictures of her at the Pool of Siloam, and it was just amazing. Because, okay, here's the next generation, and lo and behold, this brand new discovery that once again, against all odds, validates the story of the Bible. And because they found it in the location, they were able to reinterpret certain events of the Bible and find out that the Bible was indeed even more accurate than they had been led to believe. They'd missed a few points, but by finding the actual historical geological reference in real life, suddenly the picture made sense again.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, yeah, as I understand it, the Israel researchers and archaeologists, they've won awards for doing exactly what you said, for like digging through and being meticulous and just finding a new system of protecting the environment the way it is. And I think one of the examples I have in my book as well is the Pilgrim's Path. So there's some really cool videos out there now where people like take you on this path that existed that, people won in the, Second Temple, First Temple eras. And now it's covered underneath, mounds, tons of, earth and dirt and rocks and debris and all that. But guess what? They are excavating it. And the point of my book, that leads to that archaeological site up there and towards the western wall, and it goes in that direction instead of going to like the east side of the Temple Mount complex. It's the so-called Temple Mount. So
are you? I'm looking now again through your images, and sorry that you're not actually in the studio. You've got this theater and the true temple complex in figure 4. Do you want to just try to orient us to that a bit?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. That's, again, Josephus supplies that information. So he says that the Temple Mount complex was a 4 furlong square. So, and it was a leveled area. And there were 4 gates towards the west, I guess, towards the back. And one led to Herod's temple. And another one led around the corner down the hill to the area that looks like a theater. So I have that old picture that just kind of shows you, well, you know what? This looks just like a theater right here in the landscape. It's like, how can you miss that? That, so that's one of the examples where it's like, well, that makes sense too. That's like another check. It's like, well, it sounds like Josephus got that one right.
Well, and so you've got in this picture, the Dome of the Rock up there to the upper right, and the supposed temple site, is that right? Or is that, no, that's the Al-Aqsa Mosque then?
Right, actually it's both. So in the far distance, there is the Golden Dome is like kind of right on the edge of that picture. And it's harder to see, but they're both on there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what I'm going to do now, Bert, is go to a quick commercial break. We had some interesting comments in the chat about prophecies and, Jesus' feet splitting the Mount of Olives right down the middle, and whether that referred to his first or second coming. I want to share a little something with the audience as well, based on my own research. And, the audience knows I have an undergraduate degree in biblical theology, and spent my whole life studying into these various topics. One of the things that always struck me was, the conflict in Jesus' day, right, when he came the first time, and the disputes around whether he was or wasn't the Messiah, and even the confrontation with Pilate, do you say you're a king? And he said, you say that, and they say that, was he or was he not a king? Well, the reason that was such an issue is that's what the Jews in that day were expecting. They were expecting the Messiah, but the Messiah was to come and be a conquering king, because we and if you know the story of William Miller in 1844 and the Great Disappointment, everyone was looking for the return of Jesus, the second coming, to come down from heaven and take over the kingdoms of this world, and establish the kingdom of God on earth at that time. And that's what the Jews were expecting, that he would come and overthrow the Roman occupation, the Roman rule of Palestine, as the Romans called it, which was their ancestral homeland at the time, and they were living there. But in the Hebrew scriptures, so the so-called Old Testament, you have these conflicting visions or descriptions of the Messiah. Was he to come and suffer and be crucified and die an ignominious death? Or was he to come and be the victorious King of Kings and Lord of Lords? And of course, spiritually, you can say, well, he did both, right? He came to suffer and die, and yet he was ascendant because he overcame sin. He resisted Satan. He won the great spiritual victory. But the fact of the matter is that many of the prophecies related to Jesus' second coming do refer to him as that conquering king. So at the time, it was hard for the people in that day and age to figure out, were they expecting a suffering Messiah who would be crucified and die in ignominy, but perform spiritual, superhuman achievements in that context? Or was he to come and overthrow the Romans? Which was it, right? And you had these competing ideas. So these things have still, like the discovery of the pool of Siloam, there is still the possibility of doing research and understanding these things more fully. So long-winded introduction to this next video, which I want to share, which is a book, as you mentioned, it's Passover, The third volume of Eileen Maddox's The Coming of the Glory is also being published today. And it's interesting, this is episode 95 of the Created in the Image of God show. And there's this thing about 95 prayers that has some interesting significance to many of the people in the audience here. So there's an interesting intersection of events going on today. The Passover, it's Rizvan for the Baha'is. And we've got the 95th episode, and Eileen Maddox is publishing her book. All of these things, varying degrees of importance. I don't mean to equate them one with the other, but nonetheless, with that sort of rambling introduction, I'm going to now play the video for Eileen Maddox's final book in the trilogy, The Coming of the Glory, which explores the Hebrew Bible and provides explanations about these prophecies. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Bert Lorenz.
Ancient tapestry of Israel's prophetic legacy with the Coming of the Glory book series. Volume 1 unveils the foundational pillars of Israel's history, from the patriarch Abraham to the prophetic mantle carried by Elijah. Volume 2 immerses you in a world of turmoil and revelation, where prophets like Jonah, Amos, Isaiah, and Jeremiah stand as beacons of courage. Volume 3 delves deep into the tapestry of biblical exploration, weaving threads of insight into the enduring struggle between belief systems. Experience the triumphs and trials of the Israelite, from exile to restoration, guided by prophets and divine intervention. Embark on a quest of discovery and revelation with the Coming of the Glory series, a harmonious blend of history and prophecy. Secure your copy today.
Welcome back. It's Wade Franson, host of the Created in the Image of God show, and I'm here with Bert Lorenz, not actually in the studio, but by phone. You still there, Bert?
Yes, I am.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and put up the QR code for those who want to order that book. We'll, of course, also, I showed earlier the cover of Bert's book with the QR code to order that, and we'll do that as well again here. But given that Eileen's book is being published today, there's a special discounted offer which ends tomorrow. You can scan that QR code there, and it'll take you directly to the website. I'll also put it in the chat. So Bert, what's your view of the prophecies of Jesus, his return? Do you have any particular perspectives on that, and how does that play into your book, The Temple Solution?
Yeah, well, I'll say absolutely. So, right, I think we're in the end times. We're approaching, and the way I look at it is we're heading into the millennium. I'm ready to go forward. Let's get into like a better
and unpack the millennium. It's possible that not all the audience members know what that is.
Oh gosh, so that's the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ, where you can call it the utopia, but it's just going to be the world where the world works the way it should. With people, first of all, recognizing God, but also just being civilized and being kind to another and just being faithful. And it's just like the utopia really is how it's presented. That's where you hear about those verses. So the ox and the wolf,
the lion and the lamb will lay down, Isaiah 11.
It's the wolf and the lamb, but
right.
It's that period in time. But I mean, but that comes after like the end times.
Right. The lion will eat straw like the ox, and the wolf and the lamb will lay down together.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So I believe we're approaching it. But we're not there yet. I think a lot still needs to happen. But so since you mentioned it, so on my website, I actually produce a little timeline. My website is bertlorenz.com. I have a resources page, and under that, there's a PDF with a one-pager with like several pages of references. And my position at this point is that square one on that map is that Jesus is where he's at. He's at the right hand of God, and I don't think he's going anywhere until an obligation or a condition that, there's this word until. So stay, and what is it? Psalm 110, stay at my right hand until your enemies are placed under your feet. So you need to understand, well, what does that mean? What does your feet mean? Well, I think that's, heaven is God's throne, and earth is his footstool. And I'll just say he's the enemy. So when does he get thrown down, to earth? So he's not going anywhere until then. And so that's one of the big signs I see, on the horizon. But if anybody is interested in my timeline, I wanted to say, I want at some point want to actually get a little podcast going. It's something I want to discuss, even with this book too. I'm glad to have this experience today, because I want to just create like the open dialogue and conversation. It's all about talking about it and trying to discern what the truth is. And I'm offering a plan, so I hope people can kind of resonate with that and just realize, hey, there might be a solution to this one problem. I mean, there's numerous problems out there, but my mind kind of engaged this single problem, like, well, how can that be solved? Because that seems impossible. Okay. So that's kind of my thinking behind the book as well.
Yeah, and let me just sort of double down and emphasize that if we go to the Word of God and we diligently study it, we knock, we seek, we ask with an open mind, the answers are there. The answers are there in the Word of God. They can be found. And the deeper you dig with that childlike, not a childish, but a childlike attitude. Jesus said the kingdom of God will be inherited by little children. You must become like the little child. You must be childlike. Children have a natural curiosity. In a sense, they might be a little gullible. They'll believe what the adults tell them. We end up believing in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, sadly. We didn't teach our children actually that any of those existed, to not ever betray that trust. But the point being that God will reveal. He will, provide answers to those who diligently seek him and who tremble at his word.
Yeah, in his time too, by the way.
Well,
so.
Right, but his time is also, it's sort of like if you look at the march of history and the march of civilization, people learn things when they are brought to their knees. And let me put it differently. If you look at the Bible going all the way back to the book of Genesis, you have this serpent, right, symbolic of the devil, in the Garden of Eden. When you get to the book of Revelation, you have a dragon. And the thing is, the dragon is the serpent grown up. How does the serpent grow up and turn into a dragon? Well, when enough people listen to the whisperings of the satanic impulses and ideas, when they eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they allow themselves to be swayed and taken away by their lusts and their desires, as it says in many other scriptures, they go astray and they adopt false gods. They come up with false ideologies. The next thing you know, you have a Hitler, you have a Stalin. Now, when enough people listen to their own, whispering impulses rather than humbly going to the Word of God, they give political power to the wrong, to the negative, to the lie. And that is when the dragon emerges, right? And real havoc is wreaked. And it's not that there needs to be a literal Satan who is breathing fire in the form of a dragon and wreaking havoc. No, we do it to ourselves. So you talked about the millennium emerging with the ability to send man to the moon and astronauts to look at this blue jewel in heaven. floating in space. From the perspective of the Earth rise, we have a recognition today of being one planet, of being one people, of having to take care of this precious jewel. So the task that was given to Adam, even before Eve was formed in the book of Genesis, to dress and keep the garden, is on the tops of humanity's mind today. Now, they're not going about it in a godly way, but we are being driven in that direction. We are being driven to humility and to work together and to seek God's assistance. At least that's how I view things, and in order to counteract these problems. So it is being brought about, and it can be brought about by us humbly going to the Word of God and seeking His guidance and His advice to handle the insurmountable problems that are insurmountable exactly because large numbers of people have become godless and have completely gone astray.
Yeah, I mean, those are some great points. I think we all actually work together, and it's like a big puzzle. I mean, there's a bunch of pieces.
Amen.
And guess what? We need every piece, by the way.
Right.
So we all kind of fit together. We all are different, of course. We all have our talents and weaknesses, but we actually need each other to make it all fit together. And what's amazing is, people, that's why I said I like traveling, because you're exposed to just different ideas and people, and just with the way people think differently all over the place. So yeah, we need each other to kind of like figure this one out and get it right.
Well, speaking of pieces of the puzzle, we've got a request from the audience that I ask you your view of Ezekiel's temple vision in Ezekiel chapters 40 to 43.
Right. So that would be the millennial temple, during the 1,000 years. And if you look at the measurements, it's a huge complex that wouldn't even fit on the so-called Temple Mount. It's like 5 times the size of that. But that's going to get built, in the millennium.
Well, then later in the book, I think it's the book of Revelation, you've got an even grander vision where it's a cube, right? It's not just 2-dimensional, but it's also 3-dimensional.
Right. Although it could be a pyramid, so I'll throw that out
there.
True,
very true. Yes, could be.
But right. One at a time. So in my book, I do mention the tabernacle, and I think that's the next, sacred place that's going to be erected. And my book suggests the Jewish quarter is where that's going to happen. But guess what? It needs to be found first. So, but it was buried. It's in that cave with the Ark of the Covenant and the table of incense. So these are all things that still need to happen, that are on the horizon. So until these pieces, fall into place, you can judge for yourself, how long it's going to take. But the whole red heifer issue, that's a huge problem. It caused a war. And that's something that the Jews say they need to get that sacrifice or that ceremony done, is what it really is, to purify the next temple area and the people and the temple and everybody. Yeah.
Well, so I gave a presentation just a few days ago on Zerubbabel, and rejoicing when one sees the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel, right? You're familiar with that from Zechariah?
Yeah. Yes.
And the books of Haggai and Zechariah. So I'll just throw this out here. We're not going to have time to talk about it today. We might have you back on the show. And this is in the spirit of puzzle pieces, right?
Okay.
So in Isaiah, it talks about, I will set up an ensign to the nations, according to the King James Version, right? A sign to the nations, a banner. And when that is set up, then the Jews and the remnant of Israel, because people don't know this, they don't realize it, but the first time the word Jews is mentioned in the King James Bible, they are at war with Israel. because the Jews do not equal Israel. There was a two nations, right? After David, you ended up with the southern and the northern kingdom, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And there were two separate waves of captivity, with the northern kingdom going into captivity in the Babylonian captivity. And that's where we end up with that phrase, the lost 10 tribes. Mm-hmm. So the scattered remnant of Israel are what would be gathered back in the Holy Land, because they're lost to history. And then you have the Jews, who were the southern kingdom of Judah, who lasted a lot longer before they went into captivity. But they were the tribe that was more faithful for a longer period of time, or the nation. There were two and a half tribes, whatever, versus the 10 tribes. And they retained their identity. That's why the Holocaust was able to happen, because they were not the lost 10 tribes, and therefore they could be identified, and a gold star could be put upon them, because they stayed true to the Sabbath day, which helped them retain their identity. They stayed true in that sense to some aspects of their covenant, which is why when the time came that the nation of Israel could be reconstituted, it was possible because they had retained their identity. Now, the point is, and I'm just throwing this out there for reflection, I'd be interested in looking at your prophetic timeline, because it's my opinion that in the prophetic timeline, the times of the Gentiles ended in 1844. And you have the first telegraph message, which President Lincoln called the telegraph, which he used during the Civil War, the war that ended slavery in 1863. There's a whole nother layer of the onion skin there as to that timing and the freeing of the slaves in 1863. But regardless, he called them lightning messages. And he said he communicated with his generals using lightning messages. So the first telegraph message was a lightning message that traveled like from east to west, or maybe it was west to east anyway. It's in conformity with the message in the book of Matthew. Like lightning, it would travel from east to west, I believe it is, or west to east. And Samuel Morse chose the phrase, "What hath God wrought?" as the first telegraph message. So you dig into that, and it's Numbers 23, verse 23, and it was sent on May 24th, 1844. And the full verse, there are different translations. There's an obscure translation which starts out like this: "From this day it shall be said." From this day it shall be said. Now, every translation basically says the same thing, but it says, according to this time, is I think the King James Version, "it shall be said of Israel, there is no curse or divination against her. What hath God wrought?" And that prophecy, or that verse, is the center of a 3-chapter prophecy, Numbers 22, 23, and 24. It's right in the center of it, where Balaam the prophet is told, "Come, I will show you what will happen in the last days." So it's for the last days, and it's a 3-chapter prophecy about the establishment and the reestablishment of the nation of Israel. And this was sent in 1844. There are other prophetic timelines that can explain why it didn't occur until 1948 and why the Holocaust still had to occur. But from the time the nation was established, though there have been successive waves of attack and efforts to destroy her that are going on now, they have not been successful. And in the recent attack from Iran, the nation was shielded and no damage happened. My point in all this long-winded explanation in looking at the prophetic timeline is that, these things don't really happen until after Jesus returns. So a few of these puzzle pieces should cause consternation and research, open-minded research to maybe, are there some puzzle pieces that help us look at the prophetic timeline in entirely different ways? that can help us discern those things that will be fulfilled literally, which there are many, and those things which may have a minor literal fulfillment and a major spiritual fulfillment. And that the spiritual fulfillment, some of the most dramatic, quasi unbelievable fulfillments, right? Like the feet of Jesus will stand on the mountain and the mountain shall cleave in two, right? There was some comments in the chat about that being symbolic and that it happened at his first coming. I won't comment on that right now, but once the puzzle pieces fall into place, like the discovery of the pool of Siloam, suddenly, you realize, oh, this blue piece, I thought it went down here in the ocean. It's actually up in the sky.
Yeah. Hey, I have one more good one for you here. Yep. So talking about those pieces. So after doing research, once again, I've come to realize that we're on like the 7-year, cycle plan, the 7-year Shemitah cycle. And I believe
you're talking about the 7 times 7 that leads to the year of Jubilee.
Well, that's part of it too, but I want to go back to Joseph real quick.
Okay.
In Egypt. So there were 7 good years, and then
got it.
Years of famine, right?
Yep.
So I'm going to present that. Guess what? That's how God counts. He has 7 days in the week. He counts in 7-year increments, and every 49th is, like you said, the Jubilee year. But guess what? Those 7-year increments haven't stopped. They just kept on rolling on. So if you can figure out, hey, well, where are we on that 7-year, increment plan? You'll have a better idea. And actually, I bring that up in my timeline, by the way. But I want to suggest that Jesus arrived in 27. On the scene as he was born earlier, of course, but 27 is when he entered his ministry, and that was again on that 7-year cycle increment, and it's continued. So guess what? A couple years ago, there was the completion of that 7-year cycle, and there's going to be another. We're in one right now. We're like a few years into it. But if you look at tribulation, guess what? That's a 7-year cycle too. So you can almost do some math. It's like, well, okay, if the tribulation 7 years, but it can't just start any day. It has to start like at the beginning of one of these cycles. And that's what I want to suggest to the audience today.
Interesting. Fascinating. Well, I think we're now like deep into prophecy rabbit hole, which is fascinating. I love to do that. But it may be a little off point for the audience for tonight's show, which is awesome. And blame me for going there. I'm not. I appreciate that you said that. I think we had actually Steve Keen on the show some time ago. I believe on this show talking about that year of Jubilee and the economic cycles, right? And what would happen if we had that debt forgiveness built into our society. And you can go back through economic history and show that every 50 years or so, there's this gigantic boom and bust cycle, and it wreaks havoc. And the more complex the world becomes, the more dangerous those boom and bust cycles become. I heard today, for example, I read an article that the IMF has warned the Biden administration about the massive spending that's spiraling out of control in this election year. And when the International Monetary Fund starts saying, hey, you're fiscally irresponsible as a nation, and keep it up, and inflation will spiral out of control. There's a lot of manipulation of facts and data, especially now as we're nearing an election year, because the question is always, well, are you better off than you were 4 years ago, right? And if you can create a climate where it feels like things are okay, even if things are going, the proverbial hot place in a handbasket, well, there are reasons why people would do that. The point is, things get very, very risky in the modern complex system. You know that from working at Apple in large scale project management. I was in financial services during the economic meltdown of 2008. And I happened to have insider awareness of how close the entire global supply chain, how close it was to seizing up, to where ships would not be transporting goods from China. They would be stuck because the system was collapsing, and which would lead to the collapse of all the manufacturing, because goods would just be piling up and not getting to consumers. And with the very sophisticated financing and debt system, this causes a chain reaction. It's like you're driving down the road at 60 miles an hour, and suddenly your engine seizes up and you lose control of the car, or your heart literally stops and you have a heart attack and the whole body dies. The circulatory system of our economic system in today's complex world, once the internet starts shutting down and online banking starts shutting down, and even during the pandemic all the stores were shut down, things are getting very, very risky. And to manage the complexity of modern society, we need to implement solutions that don't lead to these excessive boom and bust cycles. And guess what? There it is right there, way back in the books of Moses, a system so advanced that if we had it built into our economic system of debt forgiveness every 7 years and a return of land to the families that own that land, giving it back to the people every 49 years to avoid the extreme aggregation of wealth and capital in the hands of a few. But if you don't have that built into the system at the granular level, there's no solution. So how did they know that? How did the Hebrews of 3,000 years ago know this stuff? Obviously, a divine revelation.
Right. And I just want to interject and say, I'm going to plan on that happening during the millennium. And maybe that's what's going to help bring about utopia, is we actually, the world is on that system right there. The Jubilee happens every 49 years, right?
We shall see. But anyway, Bert, I think we're near the end here. I'm going to, this has been an interesting show. To have to do it this way, I'm glad it worked out. Apologies to the audience. Thank you for sticking with us through this unusual metaphor. I'm going to invite you to send some emails to me with your comments from the show. I'll put my personal email in the chat. I haven't done this before, and but I want what I'd like is for some of you to just email me. There it is, wade@soupllc.com. I'll also show it on the screen. Send me an email and tell me what you liked about the show. Tell me what you'd like to hear more about from Bert, and we'll make sure that we'll pick one of you and get the book to you. Since Bert's not here in the studio, can't necessarily see the chat, it's just going to be a little bit hard to get him to pick a favorite and send a book out.
Thanks for doing that, Wade. And thanks for everything, by the way, and making this show happen. I mean, under difficult circumstances.
Well, you just got to roll with it, and thank the divine grace that allowed us to continue. I was getting a little nervous there at the beginning, and I appreciate the audience members who suggested it. I don't know why, for some reason I was thinking that it wouldn't work, but a couple of the audience were saying, well, just try to get him on the phone, and it worked out fine.
Perfect.
Any last words for our audience, Bert, before I just take care of the one final housekeeping item, which is to announce next week's guest?
Right. Just to say, we're all in this together. We're, children of God, and let's just keep going forward together and realize that we do need one another. And pray for my sister. She needs healing. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who need healing as well. But just have a big heart for doing what's right and finding the truth.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bert. And let's remember Andrea in our prayers. So next week, same time, same place, 8 p.m. Central Time, we will have Eric Brazow. Eric Brazow is a researcher on Islam. And the topic is Muslim reformers versus fundamentalists. Eric specializes in helping people accept the reality of Islam's contribution to Western civilization. What is this reality? What is the reality of Islam in the West? He says the reality of Islam in the West is what Muslim leaders in the West say the reality is. His book, Muslim Reformers versus Fundamentalists, tells us clearly what 97% of mainstream Muslims say Islam is. So this whole topic of the name of this show, Creating the Image of God, the role of religion in society. When we have movements of populations, when we have religions coming together, when we have coexistence, when we have a multicultural society, it leads to stresses and difficulties and challenges. What's real? What's false? Eric has a unique perspective, and it should be very fascinating. We've had imams on the show in the past. I've contributed to the Interfaith Library. We're very supportive of the idea of religious plurality, and that God has worked in mysterious ways throughout human history for all peoples of all times. Eric presents a unique perspective on this. You don't want to miss episode 96, Eric Brazow, Created in the Image of God, Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Central Time. So with that, until next week, thank you, Bert. Thank you, audience. May God be with you.